And let me pop this up here. All right, so this is our, I believe it's our 5th installment of the HUD Grant Fundamentals series. These were sort of created to help lower the barrier for entry for subrecipients who are looking to work with the city using federal funds from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This presentation is on environmental reviews. So if we take a look at our timeline here, we are currently on that May month there. It's highlighted in the green. This is our second to last presentation. This one is very specialized. Environmental reviews are something that a lot of subrecipients aren't really going to touch when they're partnered with us, but the ones that do have a pretty substantial role to play, which is why we're making this presentation. We'll talk more about that later. For now, it's something I want to point your attention to is where that big arrow is pointed at, which is our application process presentation. We have moved that date to September. The purpose of that is because we're currently in the middle of our consolidated plan and we're doing updates to our application process. So we're pushing this presentation a little bit back so that we can make sure that we give you the most updated information as possible when it comes to the time to apply. So I will send out emails before the presentation in December to sort of update you all on it. And so you're sort of reminded that it's happening, because that does leave sort of a substantial gap in months between this presentation and our last one. So just stay posted, check your email, and we'll have information out on that shortly. So,
and Alex, you might, I'm sorry
yeah.
to interrupt you. Hi, everyone. Julie Johnston with CPED at the city, and we have Alex Hoffman with us today. Alex Hoffman Zobel, sorry, with CPED. Just a reminder, this Alex will be giving the full presentation, and then we'll be taking questions through the chat at the end, and I'll be helping with managing those chat questions. So if you have a question as the presentation is going along, feel free to throw it into chat, and then we'll address it at the end of the presentation. Okay, thanks, Alex. Sorry to interrupt you there.
Oh, no trouble at all. Thank you very much, Julie. I appreciate that. So, yep, like Julie had said, we won't have anything through mic. Your mics will be sort of turned off for the presentation, but type into chat and we will answer everything at the end. If you have more questions that you can't think of during the presentation, you can always email us and we'll include our email at the very end. So to start the presentation, this is sort of the agenda for it. Like I had said previously, this is a pretty specialized presentation on environmental reviews. So we're largely going to cover what parts of environmental review is relevant to a subrecipient of the city of Kalamazoo. So this is not going to be an exhaustive study of HUD environmental reviews as they are conducted within HUD. There's a lot that goes into them, a lot that is going to go on the back end here at the city, and things that even go on in HUD Detroit and at HUD Washington. So we're not going to cover any of that because that's just simply not relevant to you. So for this, we'll talk about what an environmental review is so that you're familiar with this process. We'll talk about the levels of environmental review, so where your project might sit and what might be required of it based on what your project activity is, as well as aggregation, which is an important piece of environmental reviews. And then we'll talk about Tier 2 checklists, which is something that many subrecipients of the city do have to do. Not all of them will have to. But if you are required to do these, they are a pretty substantial responsibility and require a bit more capacity on the subrecipient's end. So it's important to sort of cover this. If you're someone who potentially wants to work with the city from this presentation, you'll be able to tell, all right, what level is my review at? Will it potentially require Tier 2 checklists? And then you can sort of answer the question for yourself, do I have the capacity at this time to sort of take on this sort of responsibility, these HUD funding responsibilities? So with that in mind, let's get into it. What is an environmental review? So we're going to talk about the definition and sort of the regulations that encapsulate environmentals. So an environmental review is the process of reviewing a project and its potential environmental impacts to determine whether it meets federal, state, and local environmental standards. So what that means, the federal government, the state government, and even at the local government level sometimes, there are laws put in place to protect the environment, people who live in our communities that might experience certain negative environmental impacts. And so before the federal government funds a project, they want to make sure that the project is going to comply with all of these environmental standards so that it won't cause any undue harm to the environment or cause undue harm to humans that might be exposed to potential hazards. So environmental reviews, they require compliance for all projects. So that's sort of to say there's always an environmental review done on some level, regardless of what project it is. And this sort of harkens back to what I had said a few minutes ago, which is that there will be environmental requirements for everyone who becomes a subrecipient, but not every subrecipient is even going to notice. The city will oftentimes cover a lot of the environmental requirements by performing broad level environmental reviews for each of the projects without even consulting the subrecipient. We basically take the information that you give us when you apply, when we fund you, and we tell that information to HUD and we sort of describe the parameters of your activity, and we're able to determine whether or not there's going to be any environmental impact. So there is always an environmental review done, but whether or not you'll even see it or know about it will really depend on what it is you're doing. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the levels of review. So HUD rules and regulations that govern environmental reviews can be found at 24 CFR Part 58. So if you want to look at the statute yourself and read it, it is there. I mean, you can also check the provisions of the National Environmental Policy Act, which is NEPA for short, and the Council on Environmental Quality, CEQ. Those are in 40 CFR Parts 1500, 1508. All of those are the statutes that basically define what sort of environmental compliance is required for HUD federal dollars. Just so you're all aware, for reference, it's here. And so let's talk about levels of review and aggregation, because this is really what is going to apply to you as a subrecipient. You're going to come to the city and you're going to apply for federal funding to support your project. And depending on what project you're doing will ultimately determine what sort of compliance you have to do on your end, if any at all, or if the city will just cover it on our end. So there's 4 environmental classifications as it's defined within 24 CFR Part 58. So there's exempt activities. So those are activities that, as the name sort of implies, are exempt from any regulations that are defined within 24 CFR Part 58. There are categorically excluded activities. Those are there's 2 types. So there's ones that are not subject to 24 CFR Part 58.5, and there are those that are subject to 24 Part 58.5. Now, if all of this sort of sounds like word salad right now, I completely understand. I mean, you can probably sort of use some context clues to sort of get a picture of what these mean. We'll go through in detail each of these activities and give you an idea of what types of activities would fall underneath each classification. So for now, this is just sort of laying them out. There are, as you can also see, activities that require an environmental assessment and activities that require an environmental impact statement. Now, for the city of Kalamazoo, we really only fund activities that are in the first 2 classifications, activities that are exempt and activities that are categorically excluded on some level, so either subject or not subject. We do not fund activities that require environmental assessments or require environmental impact statements because there's just so much more work that goes into making sure that these projects stay compliant. We would have to really examine the project in detail in order to make the determination that we would go that route. So just keeping that in mind, let's sort of go through each of these classifications so you get a better idea of what falls underneath each one. To start, there are exempt activities. So exempt activities largely have to do with people. That's not really all encompassing because there are going to be some activities that fall under the categorically excluded level that are similar. But you can sort of get an idea of what might fall under here as things that clearly won't impact the environment. And so they largely fall exempt from environmental statutes, right? So those are like informational and financial services, administrative and management activities, technical assistance and training, and most public services. So when we talk about public services, those could include employment services, crime prevention services, childcare, health, drug abuse, education, counseling, etc. As you can see, these are things that really won't involve like moving dirt. They won't involve building or tearing anything down. They are things that sort of clearly fall outside of the realm of what might impact the environment or impact the environments of people that are living within the community. All right, categorically excluded activities. So there's two columns here. You can see there's not subject to 24 CFR Part 58.5, and then there is subject to 24 CFR Part 58.5. So look at the columns to see what might fall underneath each one. Under the not subject to, you can see some things that it's clear why they're not subject to this statute that defines environmental compliance. They're things that, again, don't really move dirt. They don't build anything up, tear anything down, involve any sort of like construction, rehabilitation, et cetera. So those would be like tenant-based rental assistance, supportive services, operating costs, and economic development activities. So these activities, although they are categorically excluded, they also are not subject to these environmental statutes, whereas you can see from this other column, there are ones that, although they are categorically excluded, they are still subject to environmental statutes, and we'll talk about that when we get there. When I mentioned supportive services under the not subject to 24 CFR Part 58.5 category, those would include things like healthcare, housing services, permanent housing placement, daycare, nutritional services, short-term payments for rent, etc. When we talk about economic development activities, those will include things like equipment purchases, inventory financing, interest subsidy, etc. So again, if you have an activity that is not subject to 24 CFR Part 58.5, it is likely that you will not have to do much when it comes to environmental compliance, if anything at all. Many of our subrecipients right now, they don't see what the city does on our side to handle the environmental compliance because they fall into this category. However, when you get into the category of subject to 24 CFR Part 58.5, as sort of the title suggests, it is subject to further environmental compliance, and certain responsibilities could come along with it, like Tier 2 environmental reviews. So when talking about this category, it can include things like acquisition of property, repair of property, improvement of property, reconstruction or rehabilitation of public facilities. It could also include single-family housing rehab or multifamily housing rehab. As you can tell, these things do require some substantial, reconstruction or rehabilitation or development. And these things will require a deeper environmental analysis to make sure that whatever it is we're funding is not causing undue harm to the environment. And then finally, if you'll remember, the last two categories, 3 and 4, those were ones that the city does not normally fund. We'll define this very simply, partially because we don't fund them, but also because this is often how HUD defines this category. It's simply all activities that are not exempt or categorically excluded. So in this negative frame of mind, it's activities that do not fall under some of those projects or activities that we talked about previously. When we talk about what might fall under this, those would be largely big projects, generally new construction projects of 5 or more homes. It could be conversion from one type of land use to another. And these projects, they go beyond basic environmental reviews, and they have to consider additional community impacts, which is why we try to stay away from them when we can. All right. Aggregation. This is a separate sort of requirement of environmental reviews to be considered. This is something you should consider if you are someone who's applying for funding, because it could very well put a wrench in your ability to receive funding from us. So we just wanted to define it here so that you are aware. Aggregation is when like activities for a project are required to be grouped together for the environmental review. So if you're doing a project, you have to include all of these parts that you might view as separate, but the federal government does not view as separate, into one package when doing an environmental review. So these would be activities that are in a concentrated area, activities that are within unspecified sites, activities that span several years, or activities that involve special HUD initiatives. So this largely means if you're applying for funding from us for maybe like part of a project that you're doing, you can't have already started a different part of that project without an environmental review and then get funding from us and essentially only do the environmental review on that part of the project you're getting funding for. The way HUD looks at these projects is that they are all parts of the same whole. And so if you've already started a part of your project, we cannot fund you with federal dollars because the environmental review is going to be required. And the environmental review has to be done before any part of the project is started. So that's what the second column says. We have to make sure the entirety of a project cannot start until the environmental review is completed. So if you're applying for funding, be very upfront about this, where you're at in your project, whether or not there are parts of the project that you might have already started. It's better for us to know at the outset than to find out later on, and then turns out we cannot fund you at all. So this is something to just keep in mind, right? Okay, the Tier 2 checklist. So this is something that is required for site-specific projects. I'll talk about what that means in the next slide. But like I had said before, projects that sort of fall under that categorically excluded subject to 58.5, those are the types of projects that might have to do a Tier 2 checklist. And we'll sort of explain when those situations would be. So Tier 2 checklists, they're site specific. And what that means is when we do environmental reviews, remember I said we have to do them before the project starts. However, there are certain activities that our subrecipients do that by the very nature of the activity itself, the full environmental review cannot be done before the subrecipient starts to work. And one example would be something like home rehabilitation. So for home rehabilitation, the location of a project might not be determined at the outset of the project. If we have a subrecipient whose project is, well, throughout the year, we will get applications from people in these neighborhoods, and we will determine whether or not they qualify, and then we'll go into the home and we'll repair something in their home, like a furnace or something. There's no way for the subrecipient to know in June or May, when we're doing the broad level environmental review, who might need a furnace repaired in January, right? So the Tier 2 checklist is a way for subrecipients to basically complete the environmental review by sending the site-specific information to us when they finally get an address. So like I said, if your project is one that'll fall under this subject to 58.5 categorically excluded category, and it's also a project that you might not know all of the addresses you'll be serving in the outset of your project, it is likely that you'll have to do Tier 2 checklists as part of being a subrecipient with us. So you'll want to keep that in mind if you're someone who is a smaller subrecipient and you might not have the capacity to do this type of paperwork. But with that in mind, I'll be going through every step of the process of doing a tier 2 review right now, so that if it's something that you feel like you could take on, you could always go back to this for reference. Of course, if you're a subrecipient with us, we will always work with you on filling these out and submitting these if you need any help along the way. But it will be largely your responsibility to ensure that these are submitted to us. And these need to be submitted to us before you go in and do something like repair someone's furnace. We have to get this review, sign off on it, and then communicate back to you that you are now cleared to do the work that you have designated at that address. So with that in mind, here is the tier 2 checklist, or at least the first page of it. A lot of the information that you fill out in this is pretty self-explanatory. Right at the very top, you'll fill out your subrecipient name. You'll fill out the program year. So that's not the current year that we're in, but the program year of your activity. We'll talk about that in more detail when you're funded. It's a very important distinction, but it's one that can trip up a lot of people. You'll put in the project type. You'll write down the owner and the address of the property that you're filling out this tier 2 site-specific environmental review checklist for. You'll give the property value before the rehabilitation. You'll give your estimated cost of what the repair or the rehabilitation expense would be. You'll basically check off what funding will be used for it, which whatever we're funding you for, you'll know at the outset what you'll check off there. It'll likely be the same every time. And you'll give the property value after the repair or rehab. This doesn't have to be an exact science, but something that's important to keep in mind. And it's not an exact science, right? Because you're also estimating what the repair or the rehab might cost. Obviously, when you go into the home, these things could be subject to a little bit of change. But it's not always as simple as taking what the value before the rehab is going to be, adding in what the cost of the repair or the rehab is going to be, and then that's the value after the repair or the rehab. If you're having difficulty calculating that, you can always reach out to us. But I mean, just intuitively, when you think about your own home, sometimes you put $1,000 into some project around your house, but that doesn't automatically raise your home's value by $1,000. And so that's largely what I mean when you're filling this out and trying to calculate what the property value after repair or rehab might be. And once you fill out this first box, you'll move into the second one. Something that's pretty nice about this tier 2 checklist is that there is a workflow to it that directs you to where you're going to go next based on your answers. I'll point that out as we go on. But you'll largely go down from box to box unless the italicized sort of directions in these bottom sections tell you differently. So to start, you'll put in the flood insurance and floodplain management. So we do not fund projects that are in a floodplain. So part of this tier 2 checklist is going to be to find the address on a FEMA flood map and ensure that the property is not on a floodplain. So to do that, you'll want to go to the website that's hyperlinked within the tier 2 checklist. I have it linked over here, and I'll sort of show you what you're looking for. All right, so the FEMA flood map looks like this for now. I know that there are changes that are going to be put in place, and I don't know how much this might differ within the next year or so. If it differs greatly, we might have to go back and re-record this with some updated information. But for now, this is what the flood map looks like. You'll basically, in this box here, put in the address. As you can see, I've already tested it, and so our office building is already put in to here. One thing to keep in mind is that if you do not put in Kalamazoo, if you don't put in comma Kalamazoo after the address, you will get a very random place very far out, likely not even close to Michigan. The flood map doesn't have to be exact, like you don't have to put in Michigan and then the zip code, but you do need to make sure that you include the address, comma, Kalamazoo, so that it is able to exactly find the location on a FEMA flood map. And then you click search. And depending on the time of day that you're trying to access this information, it might take longer, but hopefully when you're looking it up, it'll be fairly quick. You'll get the location and you see all of this flooding information is now filled in. These are all various flood zones. You can see zone AE, zone AE. I recommend zooming in just a little bit on the location. And what you'll do is once you get the location like this, you'll click dynamic map with this magnifying glass here. And right, as you can see, it's sort of saying it may take a minute or more during peak hours to generate a dynamic format. So we'll wait as this sort of develops. Luckily, it's not taking too long for us. And you'll get something like this. And this is what you're going to want to save in your folder maybe that you created for this address. And you'll eventually combine it with your checklist in a PDF file that you email to us. So this is what you need in order to fill out the checklist. If you look, well, I'll point out the two pieces of information you need while I have this map up right now. You'll want the zone. And as you can see, this is zone X. And you'll want these digits here, these last three number digits and the letter, so 187D. And these are going to be the pieces of information that you'll put on the tier 2 checklist itself. So if we go back, you'll notice it asks for the firm panel number. Those are the three numbers in the letter, so you put 187D right there. And then flood hazard zone, you would put zone X there. Now, if it's a project that is going to be with us, you're going to want to make sure that it's in zone X. That means it's not in a flood zone. If it's anything different, it's likely that it is in a special flood hazard area. And as you can see from down here, if the property is in a special flood hazard area, stop. Grant funds will not be provided due to flood insurance monitoring requirements, which basically means it is not an eligible address. And you'll want to answer this up here as well, which you can use by looking at the firm panel number. So, the flood hazard zone. So zones containing letters A or V. If that's a yes, then it's in that special flood hazard area. So you'll want to make sure that that's checked no and that the zone is zone X and that you have that firm panel number in there. And then the flood insurance section is done. So if you look down here, if the property is not within a floodplain and flood insurance is not required, you can proceed to the next box, which is this maintenance and categorical exclusion box. So for this, you'll want to use this link provided that's hyperlinked within the tier 2 checklist to determine if the activity that you're filling out this checklist for is considered maintenance. So I have that linked over here just so you can take a look at it. Because we don't have a specific activity in mind for this sort of walkthrough, I'm just going to show this to you so you can maybe see what might fall under this. And it'll help you determine how you fill out that box. So, right, you can see some of these maintenance or rehabilitation activities that could fall under it: lawn care, snow and ice removal, neighborhood cleanup. It sort of filters them by larger features, right? So building exteriors or roofs. So if you're fixing a roof, you might be able to just skip down to here and look, okay, it's fixing leaks or it's, installation of solar panels or something like that. And if it falls in here, you'll want to attach this with the one indicated that with the activity indicated that you're doing as sort of proof in your tier 2 checklist. So save this as a PDF as well, and then maybe include a box around it. We also have a checklist form of this where there are check boxes next to all of them. And we'll include that with your agreement so you have it ready for you. I need a drink of water. Okay. So if the activity is considered maintenance, you're able to check yes, and that's based on what you were able to determine from that list that you were going through. And this is where your big skip comes in. So if an activity is considered maintenance, you can attach a copy, right? Just like I said, with it identified. And no further environmental review is required at this point. That means you can skip all the way to the end of this checklist and you are effectively done. And I have to stress this because a lot of subrecipients will often miss this part and they'll do all of the other work anyways when they do not have to at all. That could be the end. You just have to sign it, put everything in a PDF and email it to us and you're done. If it's not considered maintenance, then you will want to continue to go forward to the historic preservation section. So for the purpose of this walkthrough, we're sort of going to do everything. Let's continue to historic preservation. Here you will want to put, and so you'll see this, I've sort of blown up this page a little bit more. This is where the maintenance box was. Now we're going to this historic preservation section below it. You'll see that this includes two questions. What is the year built of the property? And is the property 50 years or older? If the property is older than 50 years, there has to be further historical preservation compliance that has to be done. If it's not 50 years or older, then you can proceed through the rest of the checklist. To find out the year built of whatever building it is that you're doing your work on, you can go to the City of Kalamazoo BSNA webpage. We don't have that hyperlinked in here because it's not the only way to do this. You could also ask the owner or go through some sort of archive, maybe through the public library or something. But I found that the City of Kalamazoo BSNA webpage is one of the quicker ways to do this. So I'll click on this link here and sort of show you what it looks like. This is our BSNA page. All the information on here is public. You just put in the address. Again, we'll put in our building here. And you'll want to click on it. Make sure it's the right one. And you'll see right here, it gives the year built. So the year built of our building is 1992. It also includes a nice little picture. This will actually be useful if you have to do more of the historic preservation compliance. And you'll basically take that year, you'll go back to the year built section, you'll put in 1992. That is not 50 years or older, so you'll click no and you can proceed. Now, if it is 50 years or older, you will have to include this historic significance response sheet as well. So some very simple things that you'll have to fill in here. Basically your organization's name and address, the date, the address of the property, what you'll be doing there, whether it's new construction, rehabilitation, demolition. You'll put in the street number for the home, the district. You can also get this information from BSNA, just so you know. The date of construction, so you should already have that if you went to BSNA. The legal description, which will also be on BSNA. This is part of the reason why I recommend that website, is it sort of includes everything, regardless of the path you sort of have to go on. And then you include a photo of the building and a screenshot of a map where the building is located. So the photo, like I showed, usually there is one on BSNA, so you can take that photo and put it in here. And then you can take the map from wherever, Google Maps or wherever you might find a map for it. I believe BSNA also has a plugin for a map too. So pull all of that from there and include that in your tier 2 checklist. And then our historic preservation coordinator, Luis Pena, he will go through and verify that whatever work you're doing on this home is not going to tarnish the historical character of the home. Tarnish might be too strong of a word, but affect the historical character of the home. And as long as everything is okay, he'll give the approval and he'll let you know. If he needs more information, he'll reach out to you then too. But these are all bridges that we will cross when we get there. Hopefully you'll turn this in and everything will be good to go. Okay, contamination and toxic substances. So for this portion, you will have to use a mapping tool as well. In the next slide, I'll sort of walk you through how to do that. You'll get the map and you'll use it to answer these 3 questions here. So are there visible dumps, landfills, industrial sites? You'll say yes or no. Does this project contain an underground storage tank? You'll say yes or no. And is the project located within 3,000 feet of a toxic or solid waste landfill? You'll say yes or no. All of that information will be available to you through the environmental mapping tool. So I'll sort of show you what that looks like here. We will click on the link. This mapping tool was just recently changed. So it used to be a little bit more simple. Now there are a couple of extra steps to it. So I'll make sure to go through this sort of slowly so you get the gist of it. One thing that I want to sort of note to you right away is that although it prompts you to search by location and attribute over here, you don't want to use these search features to find your address. So sort of ignore this section. What you'll want to do right when you start is go into environmental management, and you'll want to click all of these boxes under environmental management. Underground storage tanks, leaking underground storage tanks, contamination sites, Superfund site boundaries, okay? And if you'll notice, those are pretty much what the questions were asking for in our previous slide. So once you select these boxes, you can see that the map really blows up with a lot of information, right? So you'll want to narrow it down to where your building is exactly. You will use this magnifying glass up here to search for the address, not the location down here, but up here. Find address or place. You'll put in your address you're looking for. Again, I'll put in our building, 245 North Rose Street. Make sure to select Kalamazoo and not Ishpeming. And it's pulled up our building here. And you can see there is some information around that sort of gives us a clue to what sort of environmental sites are around. Before you go to print this map down here, you want to make sure that you dock the address. This is something that's new with the new environmental mapper. So click dock, and now this will stay when you go to print map. So once you have all of these boxes selected, you've got your address docked at the location. You're at a reasonable zoom level. I would say that this is pretty reasonable. You can zoom out a little bit more if you want. Don't go super close. If it's like right here, this doesn't give us any information. I'll put it like this. You can see a couple of blocks. Print map. It's this button down here. All of this that's set is all right. Select print. Now this does take a moment. You can see that it's loading up in this results section. You can click over to it to see that it's generating the map for you. We can all just take a moment to appreciate the beautiful environmental map that has been developed while it's still loading. And obviously through this time too, you can also check. Remember, there were certain prompts like, are there sites that are within 3,000 feet of the building? Here would be a good time to look and see, okay, where are there any contaminated storage tanks nearby? Are there any toxic sites within 3,000 feet? Very helpful to double check on all of this. Don't just go through and print this map and expect us to sort of determine that you've answered the questions correctly. Really take a look at all of the information that's being given. So you can see it's loaded. You can click on it, and it's developed that map for you. And so from here, you'll just save this as a PDF, and you'll attach this to your Tier 2 checklist, remembering to answer these questions correctly down below. And you'll see the prompt tells you where to go next. If there's the answer no to all of the questions, it has to be for all, you can proceed to the next section. If there's yes to one or more of these questions, then you will need to contact us for assistance, which means that we need to do further environmental scrutiny before we can decide whether or not this address is feasible. We'll do that on our end. We're not going to necessarily require that of you, but you need to make sure that you make us aware.
Hey, Alex.
So, yes.
I just wanted to, sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to ask a question about that map while you had it up for our audience.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't look like it generates a legend when it prints.
Oh, you're right.
So, like, what are the boxes? What are the stars? Does it tell you anywhere in this what those are so that they'll know how to, to answer the questions?
No,
And I'm
you're
sorry
correct.
if I'm
Sorry, view legend. Everything is marked here. So you'll see
okay.
Underground storage tanks are marked with the plus as active and the star is closed. That's a very good point. Underground storage tanks, again, they're separated differently by open and closed. Contamination sites are these brown squares. Yeah, so the legend is here. This is when you're looking at the map and you're determining how to answer the questions, you're going to want to make sure you have a good understanding of what symbols correspond to what environmental management category. So that's a great question. Thank you, Julie. The legend, if you don't include it with your map, these will always correspond to the same things. So I will know what they mean. That's why I wasn't even thinking about the legend being included here. I'm just used to these symbols. But for you who's checking to answer the questions, you'll want to make sure that you click View Legend if you're not exactly sure how to read the map. And it will let you know. Okay. So now remember, if you answered no to all of the questions in that previous category, you can move on to this explosive and flammable hazards. Will this project result in increased residential density or cause a vacant building to become habitable? You'll answer yes or no here, and you'll see that there's a prompt here that lets you know what's next. So if it's no to this question, you can again go all the way to the end to environmental justice. You don't have to answer anything else in this box or even in the noise abatement and control box. However, if the answer is yes, you will have to answer some of these additional questions. So have any hazardous or toxic materials been used or stored near the site? Is the project located near hazardous industrial operations handling? And if there's a yes to any of these, you will have to contact us for more assistance. So these answers should be no. Obviously, answer correctly. Don't just answer what will get you through the checklist. If there is a yes, reach out to us and we'll work together to figure out whether or not this is a project that can withstand further environmental scrutiny and be worked on, or if it's an address that is not viable for federal funding. And then if they're all no, you can move on to the noise abatement and control section. So again, does this project include new construction? If the answer is no, then again, you can move to environmental justice. If the answer is yes, then you have to answer these following questions. So is the project located within 1,000 feet of a busy road or highway? Is the project located within 3,000 feet of a railroad? If you're not sure how to find information on that, there's often, especially I know Google Maps does this, there is a ruler feature, so you can take the address and you can find the nearest railroad and you can actually measure it out using maps. But if you're having difficulty with that, you can always reach out to me as well and we can go through that. But most map applications have some sort of feature that allows for you to calculate these distances. And then is the project located within 15 miles of civilian airport or military airfield? So if the answer is no to all of those questions, noise abatement and control section is completed. You can go to environmental justice here. If it's yes, you'll need to contact us. Just within this past year, there was a project where the answer was yes to one of these. And that didn't mean that the project was no longer viable. It just meant that we had to do further research to ensure that environmental compliance was properly completed for the address. So those addresses actually were able to go through and have work done on them. But it did take a little bit more paperwork in order to get to that point. So don't be discouraged if you do have to answer yes to some of these. That doesn't necessarily mean that your activity at that location is dead in the water. But reach out to us as soon as possible, especially if you're on a time constraint, because these things will extend the time it will take to complete Tier 2 review. And then environmental justice. So does the proposed activity subject low income and or minority individuals to adverse environmental impact? I would hope the answer is always no. It's important to have this here. Environmental justice is something we always need to be cognizant about as we are performing work, especially in low to moderate income neighborhoods in our community. So it's important for us to include this here, but I would hope that the answer is always no to this question. All right. And then you'll include your name as you're the one who's preparing it. You'll include your title at the organization. You'll sign it and date it. Make sure when you sign it, if it's a PDF, it'll obviously ask you, do you want to lock the PDF document after you sign? It's just a little thing to make my life easier. Please don't lock the document. after you sign it, because then it does not make it easy for me to sign it once you send the whole PDF file to me. So leave that unchecked and just sign it, leave the PDF unlocked, date it, include all of your attachments. As it says here, email your completed review as a PDF file with all your attachments included when required to cpedcompliance@kalamazooCity.org, and then you are done with your Tier 2 review. Now, I know that seems like a lot of information, but like I said, if your activity is maintenance, you're done after that first page. Everything else I showed you is not required. You can move on at that point. So even if you have to submit a Tier 2 review, it's not always going to be a laborious process, as I've sort of gone through meticulously step by step with you right now. So don't be too put off just yet. And like I had said at the very start of the presentation, not all projects will even have to do Tier 2 environmental reviews. If you're doing like a public services project, you will never have to look at one of these for that project, right? We will do the environmental review on the city side, really without even having to talk to you about it. And you'll be done right at the beginning of the year. So just keep that in mind. Don't be too nervous about all of the paperwork I've shown you. And with that, that concludes the environmental review presentation. We'll sort of open this up now to any questions that anyone might have.
So Alex, there's one question. And it's about exempt activities and categorically excluded activities not subject to 24 CFR Part 58.5.
Mm-hmm.
How did HUD determine which one would be exempt and which one would be categorically excluded? Because some of your examples were the same. Like I heard daycare in both. So how would we determine which ones are exempt and which ones are categorically excluded, not subject to 24 CFR 58?
Yeah, so categorically excluded, I think it's important to mention what that means is that it is excluded from having an environmental assessment being done categorically. So it's not exempt in the sense of exempt projects, as in it still falls under 24 CFR Part 58, but it is categorically excluded from this further environmental review process. And so ones that are categorically excluded and they're not exempt are often ones that have to do with maybe there's a building that the daycare is taking place in, and so we'll have to make sure that, you know, the dirt at that daycare doesn't have any environmental contaminants in it that might harm the children or something like that. Whereas maybe, did I have daycare as an exempt activity? I might have.
Yes. So maybe the difference is one, the exempt activity would be the actual daycare, the actual service of daycare.
Yeah.
Whereas categorically excluded might be if you were providing funding to support that daycare's building in some way.
Yes, yeah. That's a
Okay.
very good way to differentiate the two. Exactly.
Okay.
So, and that, you know, another one that's categorically excluded is something like tenant-based rental assistance, where you're not, you know, you're not rehabbing, you're not moving dirt, you're not constructing anything, but you might be putting people into apartments that might need to have some sort of environmental clearance to make sure there's not like radon in the building, or there isn't any lead paint in the walls or anything like that. And so there would be this further environmental compliance required.
Okay. Another question is, how can we see this meeting recording at a later time? So if you want to let people know where the recording will be placed.
Yep, that is a great question. So the City of Kalamazoo website has a HUD Grant Fundamentals webpage. So if you look up HUD Grant Fundamentals, City of Kalamazoo, that'll bring you to it directly. It includes all past recordings of all of our HUD Grant Fundamentals series, and you'll be able to watch anything at any time you want. We'll make sure that this one is put up fairly quickly after as well, so you can always pull it for reference.
Okay, one clarification I wanted to make, Alex, is when you were discussing the 4 categories and the bottom 4 that we typically don't, or the bottom 2 that we don't typically fund.
Mhm.
I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that we do fund new construction
Yeah.
primarily through the Home Investment Partnership Program funding. But as Alex said, new construction may require some additional work on the developer or the subrecipient's part to get through environmentals. So if you were considering a project where it is new construction, talk to us about it. It's definitely something that we do fund.
Mhm. Yes. Good clarification. Thank you. Were there any other last minute questions? We have a few minutes before our time slot is up. I know that this is a bit, like I've said multiple times throughout this presentation, this is very specialized, and a lot of you who might be watching this may not even really be relevant to you, depending on the activity that you're doing. But it's important for us to sort of lay this out, especially if you're someone who's considering funding, who might be doing something like new construction or might be doing something like home rehabilitation, and maybe you didn't realize you would need to do all of this work. And so you can kind of decide now at the outset whether or not you would want to take on the responsibility that came with these funds.
And I think probably one of the biggest takeaways from this presentation should be never start a project that has federal funding in it without ensuring the environmental review has been completed.
100%. It has to be done first. Yeah, not even a shovel of dirt moved before the environmental review is done. And if you stick by that golden rule, uh, you will not find yourself in trouble, at least on the environmental end of things.
Okay, it looks like we might, have another question. Do you have a contact for later questions? So maybe,
So it'll be the CPED compliance here at kalamazoocity.org. Email any questions there to us, and we will be happy to respond to them. I will respond to these ones personally because I'm sort of the environmental person around here. So,
okay, Alex, I think that's it.
awesome. Thank you everyone for watching, and have a wonderful day. We will see you in September. Remember, it's being moved back for the final HUD grant fundamentals of this year, the application fundamental presentation. All right. Thank you very much. Have a great day.